The 20th session of the Senate in the second regular session of the 60th Congress is hereby called to order. The prayer of Senator Ferdinand Marcos Jr. will be read by Senator Sonny Angara.
Heavenly Father, we humbly come before your holy presence to thank you for the gift of life. We express our eternal gratitude to you for all the wonderful and great blessings you have showered upon us despite life's continuing trials and tribulations. We pray, Almighty God, for our country and countrymen as we have just experienced the fury of another typhoon. We continue to seek shelter and refuge in your mighty protection as we beseech your embrace for all our countrymen who have lost their loved ones and properties in the recent calamities. Console us, Lord, by your mercy and unconditional love, that we may find great solace and comfort, believing that you have not abandoned us even in the stormy days of our lives. We likewise invoke your grace to bestow upon us your unparalleled wisdom and guidance as we prepare to undertake the enormous task of reviewing and drafting the final form of the Bangsamoro Basic Law. Send us the Holy Spirit to lead us in crafting this meaningful law and make this an instrument in attaining lasting peace for our Muslim brethren and for all our peace-loving countrymen. Lastly, Father God, we pray once again that in everything that we do in our legislative responsibilities and in our daily personal and family life, we will always remember to dedicate our successes to you and give glory to your mighty name. Amen.
Amen. The Senate Choir will now lead us in the singing of the Philippine National Anthem.
Bayang magiliw, pero sa silanganan, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupi, di ka pasisihit. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy, sa langit mong bugaw, may nilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang islap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagdidingding, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pang may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng buwan, ating pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya ng pag ay mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
The Secretary will call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter Compañero S., Cayetano Pia S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Hunasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Drilon.
15 senators are present. The chair declares the presence of a quorum.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 19th session, 10th of September 2014, and consider the same as approved.
Any objection? Hearing none. The reading of the journal of session number 19 is dispensed with, and the same is hereby approved.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Secretary will read the reference of business.
Bills on first reading. Senate number 2406, entitled An Act to Include in the Computation of the Internal Revenue Allotment IRA all the national internal revenue taxes collected by the Bureau of Internal Revenue and the Bureau of Customs, amending for this purpose Section 284 of Republic Act number 7160, otherwise known as the Local Government Code of 1991, by Senator Recto.
Committees on Local Government, Ways and Means, Finance.
Senate number 2407, an act establishing a holistic research and development program on orphan or rare diseases, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, by Senator Lapid.
Health and Demography.
Resolutions, PS Resolution number 910, directing the proper committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the recent COA audit report that the ERC was negligent in protecting consumers by failing to obtain the compliance of 125 out of the 139 distribution utilities, DUS nationwide, with the periodic testing of in-service electric meters while lavishing its officers with expensive computers and equipment by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Committee on Energy,
PS Resolution Number 911, directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the recent COA audit report that the Department of Social Welfare and Development has failed to deliver millions of pesos worth of relief goods and utilize hundreds of millions of pesos of monetary donations for the victims of Super Typhoon Yolanda. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Social Justice, Welfare, Rural Development.
Communication, letter from the National Anti-Poverty Commission endorsing Resolution Number 11, Series of 2014, People's Sector Council of the National Anti-Poverty Commission appealing to members of Philippine Senate to respect and protect the unified positions and agenda of the indigenous peoples, particularly the Tedoray, Lambangian, and Dualangan Manobo tribes in Autonomous Region is Muslim Mindanao during the deliberation of the proposed Bangsamoro Basic Law.
Committees on Local Government, Peace, Unification, and Reconciliation.
Additional reference of business. Resolutions, PS Resolution Number 912, expressing the sense of the Senate to join the community of nations and parliaments around the world in commemorating the 7th International Day of Democracy on September 15, 2014 with the theme Engaging Youth on Democracy by Senator Sani Angara.
Rules.
Resolution Number 913, directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation for the integration and coordination of communication and information system nationwide in crime prevention and traffic management, specifically in National Capital Region and Metro Manila by Senator Soto III.
Public Order, Dangerous Drugs. The Majority Leader is recognized.
Mr. President, I move that we consider on third reading Senate Bill Number 914 under Committee Report Number 13. This is the legislative bill on chemistry, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of Senate Bill 914 under Committee Report Number 13 on third reading is in order.
Mr. President,
Yes, Senator Soto.
may I be allowed a manifestation for PS Resolution 913? Senator Greg Honasan is a co-author.
The desire of Senator Honasan to be co-author is reflected on the record.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, may we request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill without prejudice to inserting into the Senate Journal and Record the whole text thereof.
The Secretary will do so.
Senate Bill Number 914 under Committee Report Number 13, an act to regulate and modernize the practice of chemistry in the Philippines and for other purposes.
Mr. President, copies of this measure as approved on second reading have been distributed to the members of the Senate last September 11, thereby complying with the 3-day rule found under Section 26, Paragraph 2, Article 6 of the 1987 Constitution. I thus move for a roll call vote.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Roll call vote. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter Compañero S., Cayetano P.I.S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito Enriles, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Honasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Smeña, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Drilon.
15 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. Senate Bill 914 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill Number 694 under Committee Report Number 57. This is the Military Veterans Benefits Bill, Mr. President.
Consider any objection? Hearing none. Consideration on third reading of House Bill 694 under Committee Report Number 57 is in order.
With the permission of the body, may we request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill without prejudice to inserting into the Senate Journal and Record the whole text thereof.
Secretary will do so.
House Bill Number 694 under Committee Report Number 57, an act increasing the burial assistance for veterans from 10,000 pesos to 20,000 pesos, amending for the purpose Republic Act Number 6948 as amended, otherwise known as an act standardizing and upgrading the benefits for military veterans and their dependents and appropriating funds therefore.
Mr. President, copies of this measure as approved on second reading have been distributed to the members of the Senate last September 11, thereby complying with the 3-day rule found under Section 26, Paragraph 2, Article 6 of the 1987 Constitution, and thus, Mr. President, I call for a roll call vote.
Secretary will conduct a roll call vote.
Roll call vote. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter Compañero S., Cayetano Pia S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Onasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Drilon.
15 affirmative votes, no negative vote, no abstention. House Bill 694 is hereby approved on third reading.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider proposed Senate Resolution number 912.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of proposed Senate Resolution 912 is in order.
May you request the Secretary to read the title and text of the measure?
The Secretary will do so.
PS Resolution number 912, introduced by Senator Sani Angara. Resolution expressing the sense of the Senate to join the community of nations and parliaments around the world in commemorating the 7th International Day of Democracy on September 15, 2014 with the theme, Engaging Youth on Democracy. Whereas in 2007, the United Nations declared September 15 of each year as the International Day of Democracy and called for UN member states to celebrate the day through activities which promote and raise public awareness about democracy and its interdependence with development, as well as respect for all fundamental freedoms and human rights. Whereas the Interparliamentary Union, of which the Congress of the Philippines is a member, unites parliaments across the globe in commemorating the International Day of Democracy and has adopted for this year's celebration the theme Engaging Youth on Democracy, which underscores that the full and active participation of young people as future leaders and decision makers in democratic institutions and processes is a requisite for meaningful democracy. Whereas since a quarter of world population is below the age of 10 and with an estimated 1.8 billion youth aged 10 to 24, 30.4 million of whom live in the Philippines, the security, development, and prosperity of the democratic world therefore contingent upon the ability of countries to equip the youth with the necessary knowledge and skills for them to realize their full potential. Whereas the Global Youth Well-Being Index found that the vast majority of the world's youth are experiencing lower levels of well-being, and even where youth are doing well, there may be an absence of an enabling environment or the lack of opportunities for them to thrive in all aspects of their lives. Whereas there are 30.4 million Filipino youth facing problems such as the lack of quality education at all levels, high unemployment rates, and numerous health issues. In addition, their decreasing engagement in the democratic process is also a challenge which deters their capacity to effectively contribute in nation building, whereas it is imperative for the Senate to pursue measures that promote the Filipino youth's well-being, knowledge, and skills which will redound to their enhanced participation in the nation's political, economic, and social activities. Now, therefore, be it resolved as it is hereby resolved by the Senate of the Philippines to express its sense in joining the community of nations and parliaments worldwide in commemorating the 7th International Day of Democracy on September 15, 2014 with the theme, Engaging Youth on Democracy.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize the author, Senator Sani Angara, to deliver his sponsorship speech.
Senator Angara is recognized to deliver, to sponsor the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader. Esteemed colleagues, for many Scots, September 18, just a few days from now, could mark the beginning of a new era. The referendum on Scotland's secession from the United Kingdom could spell generations of change, not just for their nation, but for European politics and even world politics as well. Over the weekend, demonstrations were launched supporting either end of the debate. And while debates have been rigorous and heated, everything has been peaceful. Halos kalahating mundo ang layo ng mga pangyayaring ito mula sa Pilipinas, ngunit hindi po bago sa mga demonstrasyon, tumungo sa lansangan at ihain ang ating mga hinaing at paniniwala. Naniniwala tayo na ang bawat tao ay may taglay na dignidad, kaya marapat lang na ang bawat isa'y mabigyan ng pagkakataon lumahok sa kalakaran ng lipunan, lalo na sa politika nito. Things were not always this way for us, Mr. President. Democracy, on top of our independence, had to be fought for. We continue to fight for it today on the belief that it is a privilege earned, not squandered, and a responsibility respected, not neglected. The past year has been a tumultuous one for the Senate, which saw its trust and public satisfaction ratings plunge. But it cannot be denied, Mr. President, that to this day, the Senate remains one of the bulwarks of our democracy, the venue where the people's ideals and interests are rightly aired out and defended. It is legislators who, by virtue of the mandate vested onto us through the people's vote, mantle of airing out and defending these very same ideals and interests. Which is why the Philippine Senate, Mr. President, should be at the forefront of deepening our democracy and promoting it throughout the country. For without democracy, the pronouncements made throughout these hallowed halls would ring hollow. In 2007, in preparation for the 20th anniversary of the first International Conference of New or Restored Democracies held in Manila in 1988, the United Nations marked September 15 of each year as the International Day of Democracy. Today, September 15, the Senate of the Philippines joins hands with parliaments and legislatures all over the world to commemorate once more the 7th International Day of Democracy, or IDD, a celebration and a lasting reminder that upholding and promoting the ideals of democracy remain relevant for all time. Especially now, when transparency and accountability are the banners that government should uphold. For while democracy ascribes a voice to every citizen, it also affords them the right to a government that does not hide anything from them and a government that operates for the many and not for the few. This year's observance of the IDD highlights the crucial role of today's young people in building a better world. Totoo nga na ang kabataan kasi ang pag-asa ng bayan, buhat ng kanilang talento, kakayanan at potensyal. At bilang mga nakatatanda sa kanila, maaari natin silang tulungan gamitin ng husto at wasto ang potensyal na ito. At marapat na sa kanila natin ituro ang mga prinsipyo ng demokrasya na ating pinahahalagahan. That's why it is timely, Mr. President, that the theme of this year's IDD is Engaging Youth on Democracy, taking into account that meaningful democracy also entails meaningful youth participation. At present, we have the largest youth generation in human history, with an estimated 1.8 billion youth aged 10 to 24, which is equivalent to a quarter of the planet's population. In addition, another quarter of the world's population is composed of children under the age of 10. Within this context, the future of global development and progress largely depends on the welfare and success of the young. The global demographic situation may appear full of promise, knowing that we have generations of workers, leaders, and heroes on the rise. Yet, let us consider the following, Mr. President. Data from the Global Youth Well-Being Index indicate that around the world, nearly half of the youth are either unemployed or underemployed. Over 120 million of them remain illiterate. Here in the Philippines, we have a total of 30.4 million Filipino youth aged 15 to 24, which accounts for 31% of our population as of 2013. And according to the government's April 2014 labor force survey, among the 3 million unemployed Filipinos, almost 50%, or 49.8%, are from the youth. The International Labor Organization, in its Global Employment Trends 2014 report, estimated that Philippine youth unemployment rate stood at around 13 to 15% in 2013. The same survey, Mr. President, found that of our 9.25 million strong youth labor force, our young ones, aged 15 to 24, who were either looking for work or had worked at least 1 hour in the past week, 1.45 million of them were unemployed. This constitutes a youth unemployment rate of 15.7%, which is more than double the 7% national unemployment rate and more than 3 times the 5.1% unemployment rate observed among Filipinos aged 25 to 54 years old. These staggering figures indicate that despite being in a better position to share and benefit from growth and development, many young people are in reality marginalized and deprived of the opportunities that our globalizing world has to offer. As lawmakers, this is an impelling reminder that the need to promote and protect the well-being of our youth is as urgent now as ever. There is also an increasing disinterest of the youth to participate in democratic activities, particularly during elections. Notice a low turnout among youth voters. In addition, there is growing youth dissatisfaction with government in general that must merit our attention, since these sentiments threaten the future of our representative democracy. Now more than ever, we are called to strengthen our dialogue with the youth by being transparent, sincere, and accountable in order to restore their dwindling faith in our nation's institutions. There's a need to engage the youth on democracy, Mr. President. As legislators and parliamentarians, we should be able to forge a stronger partnership with the Filipino youth if we reach out to them in the language that they understand and respond to, and through their channels. Information and communications technology and the prominence of new media have made it easier for us to gauge and elicit youth opinion on timely issues. We have better access in understanding youth needs. I encourage all of us here today to continue using all available communication channels in engaging our young Filipinos in genuine dialogue so we may dispel their growing dissatisfaction and detachment in the democratic process. We also need to imbue among our youth a renewed sense of awareness and enthusiasm to participate in decision-making. We have made strides in enacting landmark legislation in education and health, among others. However, we need to continue to work towards universal access to quality education at all levels to provide our youth with the fundamental platform for their participation in the democratic process. Moreover, we need to pursue more measures that will optimize their physical, mental, and emotional health, so our young Filipinos will grow into strong contributors to our society. Mr. President, today we celebrate democracy which many of our forefathers fought for. This is the very same democracy which we need and will continue to live for. Today we celebrate the rising generation of young people full of talent, hopes, and dreams. That is why, Mr. President, I urge our distinguished colleagues and this august chamber to adopt proposed Senate Resolution number PSR 912 expressing the sense of the Senate to join the community of nations and parliaments and legislatures around the world in commemorating the 7th International Day of Democracy on September 15, 2014 with the theme Engaging Youth on Democracy. Maraming salamat po, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we approve proposed Senate Resolution number 912, subject to style.
Any objection? Hearing none, proposed Senate Resolution number 912 is hereby adopted, subject to style.
I move for a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Suspended for 1 minute.
Sorry. Move now.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2282 under Committee Report number 56. This is the Fair Competition Bill.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of the resumption of consideration of Senate Bill 2282 under Committee Report 56 is in order.
Mr. President, with the period of general debates closed, I move that we open the period of committee amendments.
The period for committee amendments is in order.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Aquino.
Senator Aquino, the principal sponsor of the measure, is recognized.
Mr. President.
Committee amendments.
Mr. President, with the permission of the Chamber, the committee would like to propose amendments as response to the questions raised in the period of interpellations conducted in the plenary. Accordingly, we are going to propose committee amendments.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 1, line 6, delete the sentence, "This needs to be reinforced by measures that safeguard competitive conditions."
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, the amendment is approved.
Second, Mr. President, on page 1, line 6, after the word economy, insert the phrase, if I may quote, "need to be reinforced by measures that safeguard competitive conditions." The sentence shall now read as follows: "The state recognizes that past measures undertaken to liberalize key sectors in the economy need to be reinforced by measures that safeguard competitive conditions."
Any objections? Hearing none, committee amendment is approved.
On page 2, line 3, after the punctuation semicolon, insert the word "end."
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 2, line 8, delete the punctuation semicolon and the word "end." Replace it with the punctuation period.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 2, delete lines 9 to 11.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 2, line 17, delete the letter A.
Is it just the letter A?
Just the letter, Mr. President.
Just the letter. All right. Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 2, line 18, delete the phrase and, comma, parenthesis, if I may repeat, Mr. President.
Sorry?
If I may repeat.
Yes.
On page 2, line 18, delete the phrase and, comma, parenthesis B, all agents, officers, employees, partners, owners, directors, consultants, stockholders, representatives, managers, supervisors, and all other natural persons who, comma, acting on behalf of juridical persons shall authorize, comma, engage or aid in the commission of any conduct prohibited under this act. The new paragraph shall now read as follows. The act shall apply to all entities as defined hereunder and all their commercial agreements, actions, or transactions involving goods and services, period.
All right. Just for clarity, so the records can reflect it accurately, the semicolon on line 17 after 2 and the parentheses, open close parentheses on A are deleted also.
Yes, Mr. President.
All right. Just a matter of style. All right. Any objection? Just again, a matter of style. The semicolon after services on line 18 on page 2 is also deleted and replaced with a period.
Yes, Mr. President.
All right. Any objection here? Approved.
Next, Mr. President, on page 3, line 14, delete the phrase means the power to direct or cause the direction of the management policies of an entity by contract, agency, or otherwise, and replace that with the phrase refers to the ability to substantially influence or direct the actions or decisions of an entity, whether by contract, agency, or otherwise, which may include but not limited to 50% plus 1 ownership of shares in a stock company, or in the position to cast 50% plus 1 share of the voting rights of an entity, or to designate a majority of a board of directors or equivalent management entity, directly or indirectly, regardless of the number of intermediary entities, semicolon.
Any objection? Hearing none, amendment is carried.
Number 9th amendment, Mr. President. On page 3, line 16, delete the phrase held by an entity in a relevant market, individually or jointly with others, that affords it the ability to behave to a significant extent independently of its competitors and consumers. And replace that phrase with of economic strength that an entity or entities hold, which makes it capable of controlling the market independently from any or a combination of the following: colon, competitors, comma, customers, comma, suppliers, comma, or consumers, semicolon.
Can the sponsor now read paragraph G as amended?
Can I have
That's on line 16, page 3.
letter G, for the record, Mr. President. Dominant position, in quotation marks, refers to a position held by an entity in a relevant market, comma, individually. Oh, sorry, Mr. President. Just one second. Okay, refers to this one. Okay. My apologies, Mr. President. Letter G. Dominant position refers to a position of economic strength that an entity or entities hold, which makes it capable of controlling the market independently from any or a combination of the following: colon, competitors, comma, customers, comma, suppliers, comma, or consumers, semicolon.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, amendment is carried.
10th Amendment, Mr. President. On page 3, line 19, after the word juridical, insert the phrase sole proprietorship, comma.
Any objection? Hearing none, amendment is carried.
Next, Mr. President, on page 4, line 9, delete the words production or sale and replace it with total sales.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 4, line 9, delete the word relevant. Section 4K shall now read as follows: market concentration refers to the distribution of total sales within a market, semicolon.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 6, line 1, delete the phrase preferably distinguished in the area of industrial organization.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Next, Mr. President, on page 6, line 22, delete the phrase and no former law, comma, business, comma, or professional partner or associate.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Next, Mr. President, on page 7, delete lines 16 to 18 and replace it with a sentence. Section 8, powers and functions of the Commission. The Commission shall enforce the provisions of this Act, and in the pursuit thereof shall have the following powers and functions, colon.
This is on page 7,
Line 16 to 18, Mr. President.
line 16 to 18, which is deleted and to be replaced by the
The
amendment.
heading, Mr. President, is powers and functions of the Commission.
Yes.
And then the next part is what we amended.
All right. Any objection? No, the deletion is not the entire line 16. You delete line 16 starting with promote,
Yes.
not the entire line.
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Okay. Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 8, line 2, Mr. President, insert the word temporary between the words of and price. So section 8D shall now read as follows. Letter D, parenthesis, upon finding that an entity has engaged in anti-competitive acts or behaviors, stop or redress the same by applying remedies such as, but not limited to, imposition of temporary price controls, requirement of divestment, and disgorgement of excess profits, semicolon.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 8, line 9, insert the word orders after the phrase such as show cause.
Mr. President.
Yes, before we act on the motion of the amendment of the committee, yes, the minority leader is recognized.
May we ask from the sponsor what happened to the phrase issuance of injunctions? Did you delete that also? You did not read it.
On
On
page-
lines 2 and 3, page 8, the recently approved amendment, Mr. President. Imposition of temporary price controls, and then you went on to,
Yes.
to read requirement of divestment and disgorgement of excess profits.
The question is, you no longer read the phrase
Yes.
issuance of injunctions
but I
under
did not-
lines 2 and 3 on
but I
page
did
8.
not hear him. I did not hear the sponsor.
That's correct.
Mr.
Yes.
President, I thank the Minority Floor Leader for my oversight. He's absolutely correct, Mr. President. It should read, such as but not limited to imposition of temporary price controls, issuance of injunctions, requirement of divestment, and disgorgement of excess profits.
Retained. Thank
Yes,
you,
we
Mr.
are.
President.
Okay, noted. Thank you.
And we'd like to thank the Minority Floor Leader for his eagle eyes. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Next, Mr. President, on page 8, line 9, Mr. President, just for the record, we finished with insert the word orders. Is that in the record? Yes?
Okay, no, it has not yet been.
Let me repeat, Mr. President. On page 8, line 9, insert the word orders after the phrase such as show cause.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Next, Mr. President. On page 8, line 9, insert the phrase after due notice of hearing before the phrase in accordance with the rules and regulations implementing this act. Section 8F shall now read as follows. Issue subpoena duces tecum and subpoena ad testificandum to require the production of books, records, or other documents or data which relate to any matter relevant to the investigation and personal appearance before the Commission. Summon witnesses, administer oaths, and issue interim orders such as show cause orders and cease and desist orders after due notice and hearing in accordance with the rules and regulations implementing this act.
Any objection here and now?
Mr. President, number 19, on page 8, line 11, insert the phrase, upon order of the courts, before the word undertake.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 8, line 11, delete the phrase, premises including land and vehicles, homes of entity directors, officers, and employees during business hours, and replace it with the phrase, offices, land and vehicles, as used by the entity. Section 8G shall now read as follows. Upon order of the court, undertake inspections of business premises and other offices, land and vehicles, as used by the entity, where it reasonably suspects that relevant books, tax records, or other documents which relate to any matter relevant to the investigation are kept, in order to prevent the removal, concealment, tampering with, or destruction of the books, records, or other documents, semicolon.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 8, line 18, after the semicolon, add the phrase, provided that adjustment or divestiture orders, which are structural remedies, should only be imposed. Mr. President, let me repeat because I missed some of the punctuations. Provided that, adjustment or divestiture orders, which are structural remedies, should only be imposed, in parenthesis 1, where there is no equally effective behavioral remedy, semicolon, or in parenthesis 2, where any equally effective behavioral remedy would be more burdensome for the enterprise concerned than the structure of an enterprise as it existed before the infringement was committed would only be proportionate where there is a substantial risk of a lasting or repeated infringement that derives from the very structure of the enterprise, semicolon.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 9, line 18, delete the phrase, have exclusive authority for the criminal enforcement of this act, including the investigation and prosecution of criminal cases filed hereunder, as well as the civil aspect of such cases where the latter has not been instituted or reserved separately. It shall seek to advance the antitrust jurisprudence in the country through its litigation and participation in the activities of the executive branch and in regulatory and legislative processes, and replace that with the phrase, continue to investigate and prosecute all criminal offenses arising under this act and other competition-related laws.
May the chair know what is the difference between the amendment and the existing provision?
The existing provision, Mr. President, is simpler stated and it's more direct to the point regarding the powers and functions of the DOJ and hence the Office of Competition. Basically, Mr. President, this, as we had discussed in the interpolation, this basically clarifies that the Office of Competition of the DOJ is really for the criminal cases.
Okay. All right. Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Number 23, on page 10, delete lines 1 to 3, and the subsequent sections shall be renumbered accordingly.
Page 10, line 1 to 3. And all right. Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 10, line 14, Mr. President, delete the words a criminal offense and replace it with the word prohibited.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Next, Mr. President, on the same page, line 15, delete the word and replace it with the word or.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 16, after the word competition, add the phrase including, but not limited to. So section 1 on anti-competitive agreement shall now read as follows. It shall be prohibited for entities to enter into any agreement with the object or effect of unreasonably and substantially preventing, restricting or lessening competition, including, but not limited to, colon.
The chair would like to ask a question. The provision refers to a criminal offense, the criminalization of certain acts. And we are saying that
Yeah.
can the committee chair, sponsor, repeat the amendment?
Mr. President, if I may be allowed to explain also.
Please.
If you remember during the interpellation, we had discussed about clarifying what are criminal offenses and what are the prohibited acts. No?
Yeah.
So what we did here, Mr. President, was we stated which are the prohibited acts, and then later on, in another amendment, which I will read later, discuss that if the acts are done between and among competitors, then they are criminal. But if they are done not between and among competitors, referring, of course, Mr. President, to a monopoly, these are kept as administrative offenses.
So,
So-
can the sponsor read again line 14 to 16 on page 10 as with the proposed amendment?
Can I get the... Mr. President, can I ask for a 1-minute suspension?
Yes. Ano yun? Hindi na criminal offense? And then?
Okay. So ito, this one, no? Can I see the bill? Where's that? Okay. Okay. Ready to resume, Mr. President. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, if I may clarify, Section 1 on anti-competitive agreement shall now read as follows. Entities may not enter into any agreement with the object or effect or effect of unreasonably and substantially preventing, restricting, or lessening competition, including, but not limited to,
All right. Any objection? The clarification is that the clarification is the criminalization of this act is found in another section, and there is an additional element that it must be an agreement among competitors.
Yes, Mr. President.
So that if the agreement is not among competitors, then it is not a criminal offense.
Exactly, Mr. President.
All right. Okay, with that purpose being, or that intent being on record, any objection, hearing none.
On page 11, delete lines 1 to 2 and replace it with a new subsection E, which shall read as follows. Parenthesis E. Fixing prices at an auction or in any form of bidding, including cover bidding, bid suppression, bid rotation and market allocation, and other analogous practices of bid manipulation, period.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none. Approved. So that the import of what was deleted is that it is so broad, other similar conduct is being deleted now, and a more specific act is being defined as an anti-competitive agreement.
Yes, Mr. President.
All right. Thank you. Any objection? Hearing none.
Next, Mr. President, on page 11, line 5, delete the word shall and replace it with the word may.
May the chair, and for the record, can we spread into the record what is the import of this amendment, changing shall to may on line 5 on page 11?
Mr. President, the reason here is that at times the Commission will have to weigh a lot of different standards. So in short, an act may be anti-competitive, but it may also yield to some of these more positive outcomes. And if we put shall, Mr. President, then automatically the Commission cannot, or they're automatically stopped from ruling on that particular agreement. But if we put may, it allows them, Mr. President, some leeway to be able to weigh the different outcomes of the act. So in short, Mr. President, if we keep it at shall, this become automatic. But if we keep it to may, then the Commission still has leeway, Mr. President, to assess the different standards of the agreement, how much it lessened competition versus if ever it did lead to an economic progress or technical progress, etc., etc.
If that is the intent, may the chair suggest that you insert necessarily, may not necessarily be deemed a violation of this act.
We accept that, Mr. President.
If that is the intent of the sponsor, is that so that the intention is clear? Can we have a 1-minute suspension, and may the sponsor may consult his technical staff if that is a correct amendment?
Yeah, Mr. President, there's no need. We're okay with that, Mr. President.
Okay. So
let me read it.
Session is resumed. Okay, so line 5 will now read, resulting benefits, may not necessarily be deemed a violation of this act.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next, Mr. President, on page 11, line 5, after the word act, replace the punctuation period with the punctuation semicolon and add the phrase, provided, comma, further, that acts done, let me repeat that, Mr. President. Provided, comma, further, that agreements done between and among competitors shall be considered criminal acts, period.
Instead of further, shouldn't you say forever, however, instead of further? Because further seems to imply that there are criminal acts provided in the preceding lines.
Okay.
Maybe you would want, the suggestion is, provided, however, that acts done between among shall be considered as criminal acts.
Let me read it again, Mr. President.
Yes.
So the amendment is provided, comma, however, that agreements done between...
acts done between, or agreements, whatever you would want to do.
We'll stick to agreements, Mr. President.
Okay.
That agreements done between and among competitors shall be considered criminal acts, period.
Yes, provided, however, that agreements done between and among competitors shall be considered criminal acts.
Yes, Mr. President. And to clarify further, the paragraph shall now read as follows. Provided, comma, that any such agreement which contributes to improving the production or distribution of goods and services or to promoting technical or economic progress, comma, while allowing consumers a fair share of the resulting benefits, comma, may not necessarily be deemed a violation of this act.
Semicolon.
Mr. President, can I ask for a 1 minute
1 minute suspension. Tama.
Yun nga, out naman. Mr. President, a 1 minute suspension.
Yeah.
for a separate section. Mr. President.
Ready? Session is resumed.
Mr. President, thank you for the clarifications. We would like to state for the record the paragraph in question. So the paragraph shall now read as follows. Provided that the above agreements which contributes to improving the production or distribution of goods and services or to promoting technical or economic progress, comma, while allowing consumers a fair share of the resulting benefits, comma, may not necessarily be deemed a violation of this act, semicolon, provided, comma, however, that agreements done between and among competitors shall be considered criminal acts, period.
Would the sponsor kindly repeat, just for clarity?
Yes, Mr. President.
Provided
That the above agreements which contributes to improving the production or distribution of goods and services or to promoting technical or economic progress, comma, while allowing consumers a fair share of the resulting benefits, comma, may not necessarily be deemed a violation of this act, semicolon, provided, comma, however, that agreements done between and among competitors shall be considered criminal acts, period.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none. Approved.
On page 11, line 6, delete the words a criminal offense and replace it with the word prohibited.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none. Approved.
On the same page, line 8, after the word includes, add the phrase but not limited to. Section 2, on abuse of dominance, shall now read as follows. It shall be prohibited for one or more entities to abuse their dominant position by engaging in conduct that would unreasonably and substantially prevent or restrict competition, period. The abuse of dominant position contemplated by this act includes, comma, but not limited to, colon.
All right. Therefore, the intent is not to criminalize predatory behavior towards competitors?
No, Mr. President.
Just to make clear on the
Yes.
record what the intent of the sponsor is, we are deleting the phrase, it shall be a criminal offense.
Yes, Mr. President. These
and,
now will just be will elicit administrative penalties for this section.
Mhm. Will this effectively amend the provision of the revised penal code or on
Yes, Mr. President. We will be repealing Article 186 of the revised penal code.
monopolies and combinations in restraint of trade would no longer that this in effect would amend that provision of the revised penal code?
Yes, Mr. President. And we will specifically state that we are repealing the revised penal code in the latter provisions.
All right. May we know, for the record, why there was a change in the policy thrust on the part of the sponsor, making it no longer making predatory behavior towards competitors or no longer a criminal offense, which it is until under the revised penal code.
Mr. President, there was a, coming from our colleagues in the House and DOJ, there were some suggestions early on that we limit the criminal acts to those on horizontal agreements. Yes, Mr. President. So we've kept the criminal acts to monopolies, cartel-like behavior, to cartel-like behavior specifically, and basically tried to narrow down on the acts which are truly criminal, no? But for acts which are vertical in nature, these are currently already finable offenses, Mr. President. This actually, Mr. President, mirrors the European regime in terms of dealing with competition.
Right? I just want to spread that into the record, that is the intention of the sponsors of this measure, that predatory behavior is just a prohibited act, not a criminal offense.
Yes.
Now, what about agreements among competitors which will in effect have as a result predatory behaviors?
Mr. President, then that would fall under because predatory behavior can fall under the acts which restrict competition. So again,
Yes.
if it is done among competitors, it does become a criminal act.
Okay, we just want to spread that into the record.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's what I said. Yes. So, Mr. President, no, just to clarify again, what is criminal now are acts done among and between competitors. Acts which restrict, substantially or unreasonably restrict or lessen competition within the market. This particular act, Mr. President, done on its own, will fall under the prohibited acts rather than a criminal act.
Okay, any objection to the proposed amendment? And hearing none, approved.
Okay. Mr. President, on page 11, delete lines 9 to 11 and replace it with parenthesis A, selling goods or services below cost with the intent of driving competition out of the relevant market, semicolon.
Can we have that again?
On page 11, delete lines 9 to 11 and replace it with colon, parenthesis A, selling goods or services below cost with the intent of driving competition out of the relevant market, semicolon. Basically defines, Mr. President, what we exactly mean by predatory behavior.
So effectively, we are deleting the phrase on line 9, predatory behavior towards competitors, including but not limited to, and start line 9 with selling goods or services below cost with
Yes.
the intent of driving out of the
Competition
relevant,
out of the relevant market.
sorry, competition out of the relevant market,
Yes.
semicolon,
Yes.
and then delete the phrase or creating barriers to entry. Is that the correct amendment, Mr. Sponsor?
Yes, it's a correct amendment, Mr. President.
All right, so reflect that on record. Any objections here? Approved.
On page 11, line 18, delete the letter A and replace it with number 1. And the subsequent subparagraph shall be renumbered accordingly.
Sorry, can
Only a matter of style, Mr. President.
Yes.
It's letters for both the subheadings, so we just wanted to differentiate and make the
okay.
subparagraphs numbers.
So instead of A and B, we change it to
1, 2, 3, and 4, Mr. President.
1, 2, 3, and 4. Any objections here? Approved.
On page 11, Mr. President, delete line 22.
Any objection? Hearing approved.
On page 12, line 2, after the punctuation semicolon, insert the word end.
Insert the word.
Just a matter of style, Mr. President.
All right. Any objection? Hearing approved.
On page 12, line 5, after the word volume, semicolon, delete the word end.
Any objection? Hearing approved.
On page 12, line 12, after the punctuation semicolon, insert the word end.
Any objection? Hearing approved.
On page 12, line 15, delete the punctuation semicolon and replace it with a punctuation period.
Approved.
On page 12, delete lines 16 to 17.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 12, line 20, delete lines On page 12, delete lines 20 to 23 and replace a new section 1 on reviews of mergers and acquisition to be read as follows. Section 1, period. Review of mergers and acquisition, dash. The Commission shall determine markets, comma, based on factors deemed relevant by the Commission, comma, where mergers and acquisitions are subject to review, period.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 13, delete lines 1 to 2.
Any lines 1 to 2? Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 13, line 4, delete the phrase, produce a relative market concentration greater than, and replace it with the words exceed.
Easy. Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 13, line 12, on page 13, line 12, before the word days, insert the word calendar.
Approved.
On page 13, line 13, delete the sentence, when the period has expired and no decision has been handed down, it shall be understood that the Commission has no objections to the proposed merger or acquisition, and replace it with a new sentence, provided that the initial minimum threshold of 50% of the relevant market shall apply until the Commission sets another minimum threshold in the relevant market.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 13, line 15, insert a new paragraph to read as follows. When the 30-day period for supplying to the Commission substantially One second, Mr. President.
Suspended for a minute.
Tama ba English? When 30 days period for supplying Commission substantially? Or Mr. President, ready to resume.
Session is resumed.
When the 30-day period, Mr. President, page 13, line 15, insert a new paragraph to read as follows. When the 30-day period for supplying to the Commission all requested substantial information has expired and no decision has been promulgated, comma, it shall be understood that the Commission has no objections to the proposed merger or acquisition.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. On page 13, line 20, delete the words section above and replace it with the words the preceding section.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 14, line 5, delete the words relevant market concentration. The subsection shall now read as follows, parenthesis A, the threshold subject to the notification requirement of section 2 of this chapter, semicolon.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 11, delete the word restrict and replace it with the word lessen.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 14, line 14, delete the word shall and replace it with the word may.
14,
page 14, line 14.
approved.
On page 15, line 19, after the word developments, insert the phrase, and the need of our economy to respond to international competition.
Any objection? Hearing none.
On page 15, line 22, after the word competition, insert the words efficiency, productivity, development of priority areas in the general interest of the country.
Any objection? Hearing none.
On page 16, after line 2, insert a new paragraph to read as follows. However, nothing in this section shall limit the authority of the Commission to take any other action as may be necessary to determine anti-competitive conduct as defined under this Act, period.
This is on page 16.
After line 2, Mr. President.
After line 2. Where nothing in this section shall limit the authority of the Commission to take any necessary to run Just for the record, this is not being interpreted to mean that they can define criminal conduct as among the action that they find necessary.
No, Mr. President.
All right. Any objection here?
On page 16, line 4, after the words following factors, insert the phrase punctuation, among others,
Any objection? None approved.
On page 17, line 5, insert a new subsection E which shall read as follows. Parenthesis E, the power of its customers to switch to other goods or services, semicolon. The subsequent sections shall be adjusted accordingly as follows. Section F, its recent conducts, semicolon, and Section G, other criteria established by the regulations of this Act, period.
Any objection? Here not approved.
On page 17, delete lines 7 to 9 and replace it with a new paragraph to read as follows. There shall be a rebuttable presumption of market dominant position if the market share of an entity in the relevant market is at least 50%, unless a new market share threshold is determined by the Commission for that particular sector, period.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 17, line 14, delete the letter F and replace it with the letter G.
Approved.
On page 18, line 1, after the words in the, delete the word relevant.
Any objection? Hearing approved.
On page 18, line 12, add the word administrative before the word penalties. Page 18, line 12, add the word administrative before the word penalties, so as to distinguish administrative and criminal, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 18, lines 14 to 19, on page 18, delete lines 14 to 19 and replace it with a new subsection to read as follows, colon. A, administrative fines. In any investigation under Chapter 3, Sections 1 and 2, and Chapter 4, Sections 2 and 5 of this Act, the Commission may impose on any entity found to have violated the said sections an administrative fine of up to 5% of the entity's total turnover in the preceding business year, period. In fixing the amount of the fine, the Commission shall have regard to both the gravity and the duration of the violation, period.
Any objection? Hearing none.
On page 19, delete lines 10 to 15 and replace it with a new paragraph. Section 2, criminal penalties. Dash. An entity that enters into any anti-competitive agreement, among or between competitors, as covered by Chapter 3, Section 1, under this Act, shall, for each and every violation, be penalized by imprisonment from 5 to 10 years, or a fine up to 10% of the annual turnover of the infringed during the previous fiscal year, up to 10% of the value of the assets of the infringed, whichever is higher, or both, comma, imprisonment and fine, period.
1 minute suspension.
It's the House, ano, di ba? Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, let me withdraw the amendment on page 19, the one referred to by Section 2, criminal penalties, without prejudice to getting back to this later on, Mr. President.
All right. So what you're withdrawing the proposed amendments
Yes,
for
Mr.
clarification later on.
Yes. This is
Proposed amendment is withdrawn.
Mr. President, I move that in the meantime, we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2282.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of the measure is suspended.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2161 under Committee Report number 55. This is the Quezon City Development Authority Bill, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of the measure is in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status is that the general debates have been closed. I move that we open the period of committee amendments.
The committee amendment period for committee amendments is in order.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator J.V. Ejercito.
Senator J.V. Ejercito is recognized.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. President. The local government unit of Quezon City through Mayor Herbert Bautista requested that Congress pass a law creating Quezon City Development Authority, or QCDA. Senate Minority Floor Leader Vicente Soto authored Senate Bill 2161. Quezon City District Representative Jose Christopher Del Monte authored House Bill number 3899. QCDA needs congressional passage of the law. Local Government Code provides LGU its corporate powers to participate or venture with any government corporation, but the same Local Government Code has no specific provisions allowing any LGU to create GOCC. Since the state allows any LGU to have its own GOCC following the Governance Commission or government-owned and controlled corporation, also known as a GCG law, RA 10149, Governance Act of 2011, following constitutional provision in Section 16, Article 12. That Congress shall not, except by general law, provide for the formation, organization, or regulation of private corporations. Government-owned and controlled corporations may be created or established by special charters in the interest of the common good and subject to the test of economic viability. QCDA is a unique kind of GOCC that might serve as a pilot project for any LGU. It is the first of a kind of GOCC solely funded and owned by a well-developed city government for its people. It is different from Partido Development Authority since PDA is a GAA-funded GOCC serving several municipalities within the province of Camarines Sur. It is also different from the Leyte Metropolitan Water District that was created through the mandate of LUA as stated in PD 198 or creation of Local Water Utilities Administration. Mr. President, this representation believes that an LGU with a consistent income of no less than 10 billion for the past 10 years or at least 10,000 per capita, like the Quezon City government, should be allowed to have its own GOCC. Mr. President, here are the proposed committee amendments. On page 1, delete the 2 paragraphs under the declaration of policy and replace it with the state recognizes the vital role of government or controlled corporations, GOCCs, in social and economic development. Thus, it is hereby declared policy of the state to authorize the creation of GOCCs that may be used to implement certain programs of local government units without violating their autonomy. The GOCCs may also assist LGUs in providing their constituents access to socialized housing, health, education, and other basic services. Toward this end, the state shall allow LGUs with their available resources to venture with GOCCs to accomplish the purpose of this act. I so move, Mr. President.
So just for clarity, on page 1, lines 26 to line 41 is being deleted. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, Mr. President.
So lines 26, starting with the phrase, the 1987 Constitution provides that the up to line 41, the word services, period, this is being deleted. Is that
Yes,
correct?
Mr. President. That's
And
correct.
in lieu thereof, the amendment that the sponsor read. Is that
Yes,
correct?
Mr. President.
Any
That's correct.
objection? Hearing none.
That will be all for now, Mr. President. I would like to continue the committee amendments tomorrow.
All right. Any objection? The period for committee amendments is suspended. Consideration of this measure will again be on the calendar at our session tomorrow. 1 minute suspension. 2. Okay, whatever. Yeah. Session is resumed.
President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill 2161.
An objection hearing on consideration of Senate Bill 2161 is hereby suspended.
I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2282, the Fair Competition Act.
Any objection hearing on resumption of the of Senate Bill 2282 is hereby is in order.
Move that we recognize once more Senator Bam Aquino for committee
Senator
amendments.
Aquino is once more recognized.
Mr. President, thank you very much. We'll continue the committee amendments. On page 21, delete lines 18 to 23 and replace it with a new paragraph. The paragraph shall read as follows: confidentiality of information, period, dash. Any document or information submitted by entities, comma, as marked confidential by proprietary information, comma, trade secrets or other similar content as may be requested by the entities and granted by the Commission, comma, relevant to any investigation being conducted pursuant to this Act, shall be marked confidential, comma, and shall not, comma, in any manner, comma, be directly or indirectly disclosed, comma, published, comma, transferred, comma, copied, comma, or disseminated, period. Likewise, comma, all notices, comma, documents and information provided to or emanating from the Commission under this section shall be subject to the confidentiality rule in this section, period. The confidentiality obligation herein shall not apply if the notifying firm consents to the disclosure or such information is mandatorily required to be disclosed by law or by a valid order of a court or competent jurisdiction or of a government or regulatory agency, comma, including an exchange, period. The identity of persons or entities who provide information to the Commission and who need confidentiality to protect themselves against economic retaliation, comma, and any Commission deliberations in regard to current or still uncompleted matters shall remain confidential, period.
Any objection hearing approved.
On page 21, line 24, delete the words 100,000 and replace with the word million.
Any objection hearing approved.
On page 21, line 25, delete the word 100,000, delete the number 100,000 and replace with the number 1 million.
Any objection hearing approved.
On page 21, line 25, delete the words 100,000 and replace it with the word million.
Any objection hearing approved.
On page 21, line 25, delete the number 500,000 and replace it with 5 million.
Any objection hearing approved.
On page 23, line 7, after the word hereof, semicolon, insert the word or.
Insert the word
Or.
or. Any objection hearing approved.
On page 23, line 8, delete the following. Or C, order the restitution to the affected parties, period. When determined by the facts and circumstances, comma, the Commission shall institute a civil action by class suit in the name of the Republic of the Philippines as parents patriae on behalf of persons residing in the Philippines and injured or otherwise affected by the violation or infringement, comma, to secure treble damages for any injury sustained by such persons by reason or any violation of this act, comma, plus the cost of suit and reasonable attorney's fee, period.
That is supposed to be deleted.
Yes, Mr. President.
So the deletion is from the semicolon after the word emission on line 8 up to the period up to attorney's fees on line 13.
Yes, Mr. President.
Attorney's fee. All right. Any objection? Hearing none.
On page 23, delete line 16 to 23 and replace it with a new paragraph. Section 9, nolo contendere resolution. Any entity whose business conduct is under inquiry pursuant to this act may submit to a nolo contendere resolution at any time before the termination of the preliminary inquiry by A, paying an amount within the range of penalties provided for under Section 2, Chapter 6, and B, submitting regular compliance reports as may be directed. Period.
1 minute suspension. Is nolo contendere Spanish in it? Is Spanish allowed as an official language? Huh? No, just a matter of form. Nolo contendere is Spanish.
Hindi pwedeng no fault kasi kahit may fault, parang they were saying no contest. We're not parang closing.
Okay, just place it there. Huh?
Para it's clear.
Huh? Yeah, whatever. Okay. Session is resumed.
Yes, Mr. President.
Any objection to the proposed amendment by the committee? The chair hears none. Carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 24, line 5, after the word thereon, add a new sentence to read as follows. in the event of an adverse binding ruling on an existing act, comma, course of conduct, comma, agreement, comma, decision or practice, comma, the applicant shall be provided with a reasonable period as may be determined by the Commission, comma, to comply with the provision of this act, comma, and shall not be subject to criminal action unless the applicant fails to comply with the provision of this act within such reasonable period.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 25, line 18, delete the words civil or criminal.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 25, line 19, delete the words civil or criminal.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 26, delete lines 15 to 25.
26 lines, 15 to 25 is lines 15 to 20. Carried.
On page 27, delete lines 1 to 6, and the subsequent sections shall be renumbered accordingly.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 28, delete lines 6 to 7, and the subsequent sections shall be renumbered accordingly.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 28, delete lines 20 to 22.
Again, on page 28,
Delete lines 20 to 22.
that continues that sentence, that provision goes to lines 29.
Yes,
I'm
Mr.
sorry,
President.
to page 29.
Actually,
Can we just
the-
complete the amendment? So,
Yes, the deletion is until page 29, line 18.
so we are deleting on page 28, starting on line 20,
Section 17 and Section 18.
17 in its entirety,
Yes, Mr. President.
which runs up to page 29 on
Line
line 15.
Yes, Mr. President. Let me just remove that. I move that we delete page 28, line 20, until page 29, line 15. In
Alright.
effect, Section 17.
Any objection? Hearing none.
I also move that we delete page 29, line 16 to 18.
Any objection? Hearing none. I'm sorry, yes. Is it an objection, Mr.
No,
Sen-
Mr. President, a question on that
Yes.
particular
All
amendment.
right. The approval is reconsidered.
Yes,
Please
thank
proceed.
you. Mr. President, why are we removing Section 18?
Mr. President, the rules and procedures of the Bureau of Immigration will already take into effect if there are offenses by foreign nationals. So, in effect, Mr. President, this becomes a redundant provision.
You're particularly saying in this section that you are that it is precisely the provision of this act.
Yes, Mr. President, because during the interpellation, a number of the other senators also talked about redundancies in other laws or procedures of other agencies. And this particular provision fell under one of those, Mr. President. The Bureau of Immigration, after a foreign national serves his sentence, really decides on deportation. So we thought it, Mr. President, that this is already going beyond the ambit of this provision, and we leave it to the Bureau of Immigration to decide on the foreign nationals who are found to be doing the prohibited acts in this law, Mr. President.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President.
The chair would also like to raise a question, especially in relation to the proposed amendment which was withdrawn and which the chair will assume will be restudied, and that's on page 19 on criminal penalties. The chair raised the issue of the entity being subject to imprisonment. Now, on the proposed, on page 28, line 17, line 20, section 17, we are deleting that, which precisely defines who are responsible, criminally liable, in case of violation by the corporation, partnership, association, or other entity.
Yes, Mr.
May the
President.
chair know now who will be punished if all of this, if section 17 is deleted?
Mr. President, no, we are currently crafting an improved language, no, but we will stick to the Corpo Code, Mr. President, that it is the responsible officers who are liable for criminal acts. The revised penal code, Mr. President, who will be because, Mr. President, if you look at section 17, it goes all the way to it goes beyond officers. Mr. President, no, you actually include general partners, employees, Mr. President, which is beyond the current regime that we are following in terms of liabilities, no, for corporations. So we took that out, Mr. President, and instead we will be using the current regime, which is found in the revised penal code. So, Mr. President, we will clarify further in the provision that we skipped who are in effect responsible for criminal acts.
Yeah.
Mr. President,
Okay. Well, yes.
rest assured that in the amendment that we will be proposing at the end, that the exactly who are responsible shall be
All right.
stated.
So there is an motion to delete. Well, okay, we acted on this already. So section 17, which runs from page 28, line 20, up to page 29, up to line 15, it was deleted. Lines 16 to 18 on page 29 was also deleted. Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 30, line 2, delete the word treble.
On page 30, line 2, delete the word
Treble.
treble. Any objection? Hearing none.
On page 30, delete lines 14 to 22.
Page, I'm sorry?
On page 30, Mr. President, delete lines 14 to 22.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 31, line 23, after the phrase except for the, insert the phrase Court of Appeals ND.
Can you please repeat?
On page 31, Mr. President, line 23,
line 23.
after the phrase except for the, insert the phrase Court of Appeals and the.
Except for the Court of Appeals
And the Supreme Court. This is with regard to TROs, Mr. President. Something that Senator Angara raised during the interpellation.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none. Approved.
On page 33, line 13, delete the Roman numeral 7 and replace it with the Roman numeral 9.
Matter of form. Approved.
On page 34, before the title of the section Transitory Provision, insert the heading letter A. It shall now read as follows. Section 3, A, Transitory Provision, period dash.
Any objection? Hearing none. Approved.
On page 35, after line 9, insert a new subsection B to be read as follows. B, transitional clause. period dash, in order to allow affected parties time to renegotiate agreements or restructure their business to comply with the provisions of this act, comma, an existing business structure, comma, conduct, comma, practice, or any act that may be in violation of this act shall be subject to the administrative, comma, civil and criminal penalties prescribed herein only if it is not cured or is continuing upon the expiration of one, parenthesis, number 1 year after the effectivity of the implementing rules and regulations or guidelines of this act, colon, provided, comma, that this section shall not apply to administrative, comma, civil and criminal proceedings against anti-competitive agreement or conduct, comma, abuse of dominant position, comma, anti-competitive mergers and acquisitions, comma, and other unfair trade or business practices initiated prior to the entry into force of this act, semicolon, provided further that during the said 1 year period, comma, the government shall undertake an advocacy program of the provisions of this act to the general public, period.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none.
On page 35, delete the number 45 and replace it with 43 parenthesis U.
Any objection? Hearing none. Approved.
On page 36, after line 3, add the following subsections to read as follows. G, in parenthesis, subsection 65B, in parenthesis, of Republic Act number 9184 or the Government Procurement Reform Act, semicolon. Parenthesis H, Article 186 of Act number 3815, comma, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code, semicolon, and, comma, parenthesis I, Executive Order number 45, comma, series of 2011, comma, insofar as it is inconsistent with the provisions of this act, period.
Any objection? Hearing none. Approved.
On page 36, line 7, delete the phrase, provided, comma, however, comma, that in order to allow affected parties time to renegotiate agreement or restructure their business to comply with the new competition law, comma, the penal provisions under Chapter 6, comma, Section 2 of this Act, comma, except for those already prohibited under the Revised Penal Code, comma, shall be imposed 1 year after the effectivity of the IRR of this Act, period.
So, what will just remain is Section 7, Effectivity Clause. This act shall take effect 15 days
Yes,
following
Mr.
its
President.
publication in the official gazette and in at least 2 newspapers of general circulation.
Period.
Okay. Any objection? Hearing none.
May I ask for a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President?
1 minute suspension.
So, we won't change. But substantially ba? Sige, how about itong 61? Let's do 61. And 62. Let's do 61 and 62. Then kung okay lang kay SP, we'll do 60 as a individual amendment. Okay lang yan?
Hmm? No. We don't have to rush this. I mean, we can do it tomorrow. But you, I don't think so. Fine, yeah. This is a very complicated law. Yeah. Basically, what model did you use? Mm. Okay. The best. Okay. Okay. And that's across the regimes worldwide. That is a fine. I mean, that's the common practice. Fine. Okay. When is there a criminal? Done among competitors, where there is no cartel, where there is no agreement among competitors, the prohibited acts are not criminal in nature, but it's still prohibited. Mm-hmm.
Committee amendment lang, sir. Then we'll tackle them later. That's why minamagate ko natin. Para we can give a big copy. So, para may extra day na. Kasi kung hindi namin isara yung committee amendment, hindi pa ito work. Pero this is just one last provision na CSP is suggesting. Okay lang, sir, kasi ito yung pagsabi namin. Sabi namin ang entity should be prison. So gusto niyang ilawin sino sa entity. So we just, but sabi niyo kasi, we just follow the court. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, for the record, I'd like to thank the remaining members of the Senate here in the hall. Thank you, Senator Angara and Senator Soto. Mr. President, on page 19,
Page 19.
delete the lines 10 to 15 and replace with a new paragraph. It shall read as thus: Section 2, Criminal Penalties. Period dash. Any anti-competitive agreement among or between competitors, comma, as covered by Chapter 3, Section 1 under this Act shall, comma, for each and every violation be penalized by imprisonment from 5, parenthesis 5 to 10, parenthesis 10 years, comma, or a fine up to 10%, parenthesis 10% of the annual turnover of the infringed during the previous fiscal year, up to 10%, parenthesis 10% of the value of the assets of the infringed, comma, whichever is higher, comma, or both, comma, imprisonment and fine, period. The penalty of imprisonment shall be imposed upon the responsible officers, comma, and directors of the entity, period.
Any objection? Hearing none.
On page 20, delete lines 1 to 3 and replace it with the following. Provided, comma, that without prejudice to sections 1 and 2, comma, Chapter 3 of this Act, comma, no criminal case for violation of this Act shall be filed unless there has been an inquiry conducted by the Commission and the same has been endorsed to the Department of Justice, period.
Any objection? Hearing none.
On page 21, Mr. President, delete lines 13 to 17 and the subsequent sections shall be renumbered accordingly. We replace this with a new provision, Mr. President.
Delete lines 13 to 17 on page 21 and the subsequent sections are renumbered accordingly.
Yes, Mr. President.
Any objection?
Mr. President, that's all for our committee amendments.
All right. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we close the period of committee amendments, but we ask that the committee, through its chair, provide the members a clean copy before we go to the period of individual amendments.
There's a motion that we terminate the period of committee amendments. Any objection? Hearing none, so terminated. For purposes of the period for individual amendments, the
Secretariat, Mr.
the
President.
Secretariat will prepare a clean copy of the amendments and of the version of the proposed measure to be distributed as soon as possible to the members of the Senate. We can calendar this for consideration sometime next week.
Yes, Mr. President.
All right?
Mr. President, I
Majority
move that
Leader?
we suspend consideration of Senate Bill 2161.
Consideration of the measure is suspended.
Mr. President, just for the record, could we recognize the presence earlier of Mayor Corinthia Crisologo and Vice Mayor Edwin Crisologo and Mayor Herbert Bautista, just for the record, Mr. President.
Just for the record, their presence is recognized.
And I move that we adjourn the session. until-
Before we adjourn, there is an additional reference of
I
business.
withdraw, Mr. President.
The Secretary is directed to read the second additional reference of business.
Second additional reference of business. Message of the President of the Philippines. Letter of His Excellency President Benigno Aquino III dated 12 September 2014 seeking the immediate enactment of a joint resolution authorizing the President to establish additional generating capacity in accordance with Section 71 of Republic Act Number 9136, otherwise known as the Electric Power Industry Reform Act of 2001.
Committee on Energy.
Bill on first reading, Senate number 2408, entitled an act providing for the basic law for the Bangsamoro and abolishing the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao, repealing for the purpose Republic Act number 9054, entitled an act to strengthen and expand the Organic Act for the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao, and Republic Act number 6734, entitled an act providing for an Organic Act for the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao and for other purposes, introduced by Senators Drilon, Soto III, Cayetano A.P., Legarda, Recto, Joseph Victor Ejercito, Maria Lourdes, Nancy S. Binay, Escudero, Paulo Benigno Bamaquino IV, Sani Angara, Cayetano P., Unasan II, and Gingona III.
Referred to the Committees on Local Government and Committee on Peace, Unification, and Reconciliation. The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn session till 3 o'clock of Tuesday, September 16.
Session is adjourned until 3 o'clock of September 16, 2014.